Welcome to Earth, a Love Story. I'm your host, Robin Lassiter. This time on the podcast, I speak with my friend and fellow experiencer, Sean. This is part one of a two-part interview where Sean details a very difficult time in his life, punctuated by a near-death experience which completely changed everything, but not right away. Sean is such a kind and affable guy that it sneaks up on you how hard his journey has been. We talk about very raw and difficult things, including a detailed and bloody account of a harrowing event that caused his NDE. So heads up if you're at all squeamish, it's intense. It's worth it, but it's intense. We also talk about his experience with hitting rock bottom in all aspects of his life, how he came through that time and how he completely transformed his reality in a really bold and unconventional way. And I have to say, neither of us recommend or condone this as a pathway for anyone else. And Sean openly admits that he almost didn't make it through. In addition to the intense description of Sean's death and return, we talk about thoughts of suicide, entheogen use, and other really touchy and difficult topics. Spoiler, he makes it through, and his hope is that his story can be an inspiration for others, if not his specific path. We all have to find our own way through the dark forest of the hero's journey. And if you're struggling on your journey, reach out to someone who can offer support. We weren't meant to do these things alone, and you are not alone, as real as it can sometimes feel. Believe me, and ask me how I know. The truth is that we are all needed. I need you on this planet doing well and thriving and serving and loving yourself and others, and you need me doing the same. We're all walking this path together, going through an experience that is specific to each of us. As Ram Dass says, we're all just walking each other home. And as I say, we're all loving ourselves and each other back to wholeness. And actually, I was just thinking about this the other day. I was resourced enough to be doing a Tonglen practice on the cushion one morning. Tonglen is a Buddhist practice where we are hoping to ease another's suffering. And normally, there are lots of days that I'm not resourced to do these kind of practices. It only arises when I have an overflowing cup. And in those moments, I try to use that to reduce suffering for other people and send the goodness out into the world. There are a lot of days when I'm just holding on by my fingernails and needing to receive rather than give. But on this particular day, I was resourced, I was overflowing, I was practicing Tonglen. And when I was done with the session, I was flooded with this spontaneous awareness, all of these memories of all of these different times in my life when I was really, really struggling, when I was in the depths. And it hit me that during those times, there were countless people all around the world who were doing practices just like I had been doing to ease my suffering. They didn't know me. They didn't know that I was suffering. They were just doing this general practice, knowing that suffering was happening on the planet and doing work to ease that suffering. And any particular time on earth, even right now, there are people praying, people meditating, people doing simple acts of service for each other, people taking care of loved ones and strangers, people taking action to ease the collective weight of being a human on planet Earth. The truth is that we take care of each other every day in millions of big and small ways. We're doing it all the time. And somewhere, right now, someone is doing it for you. Okay. That's enough of that. Thank you for listening. And now please enjoy this powerful, beautiful, funny, deep, intense conversation with my friend, Sean.
So I'm Sean. I'm an experiencer, but my first moment, it's almost like I had a rebirth. So there's the moment before, and then there's everything after. And that moment was when I had my near-death experience. This was in June 11th, 2020. This was like in the midst of my business was collapsing. Everything was, I was getting sued out left, right, and center. I was in a super dark place, and we had lost pretty much everything at this point. We had to leave our house, and we had to move back into a condo that were able to keep. And it was a two-bedroom condo, and I have two kids and a wife at the time. And we had to move everything out of our house and go straight into that condo. I was trying to fix that up because that condo's floor had collapsed underneath, and so I had to fix that up just so we could live in it because it was like it was a huge sinkhole. So I was super tired, and on June 11th, we had one day to move out, or 2 days, I can't remember, and I had just a couple things left to do before we moved out, which was do some paint touch-ups, and I was exhausted. And I went downstairs, and there was a big 5 gallon bucket of paint, and the little topper was covered in paint from the builder. So I tried pulling it, and it wouldn't pop off. And I was, oh. And I was thinking, I was like, I should really go upstairs and grab my screwdriver. And then I was like, screw that. I'm too tired. I'll use my pocket knife. And so I pulled out my pocket knife, and I put my left arm down on the bucket, and I was holding it, and I was using my knife to pry it, and I was prying at it, prying at it, prying at it, and all of a sudden it went pop, and my knife ended up in my hand, ended up flicking up and stabbing me right in my arm, and it went pretty much it went through my arm. It almost poked out the other side,
Oh my
and I
gosh.
ended up nicking my artery. And the weird part was is like it didn't hurt at all. I barely even noticed. The only thing that I really noticed was like there was blood going everywhere. So I threw my hand down on, pressed as hard as I could, trying to stop the blood, but it was just like gushing. And I went running up the stairs, didn't get a drop of blood on the main floor, which was thank goodness, because my wife was cleaning the house at the time to get ready to move out. So there was no blood there was tons in the basement, but none in the main floor. Ran outside and I was yelling at her. I was like, you gotta drive me to the hospital. Like, you gotta drive me. Like, I'm gonna need some help here. And she's running after me. She's like, I ain't driving you. There's no way. And I was like, why? Why? It's not that bad. And I turned around and there was a blood trail, like from the front door down the garage pad, across the road to where I was standing in front of the car. And that moment I was like, well, shit, that's not good. For like reference, I'm a crane operator, but I'm also a paramedic by trade. And I'd never seen that amount of blood before. I've seen some gnarly stuff, but that was a lot of blood. And it was not stopping. So I went back. She started calling 911. And I dropped my tailgate of my truck, and I leaned my elbow on the truck, and I was pushing as hard as I could because it was not stopping. And I was starting to get really woozy. I wasn't thinking very well at this time. And I was thinking, oh, I should probably put on a tourniquet. And then my muscles snapped. So because of my knife, and I was pushing so hard, I snapped my muscles. So half the muscles went from my forearm up into my shoulder, and then the other half went up into my wrist. I couldn't stop the bleeding, and it was filling up the tailgate of the truck. And I was like, okay, I got to put on a tourniquet. And for some reason, and there's a couple weird things that happened. 911 told us not to put on a tourniquet, which is really odd because I'm like, I cannot stop it with direct pressure. So if you can't stop it with elevation and direct pressure, you're supposed to put on a tourniquet or something like pressure points. Nothing was stopping it. I was draining. And I started getting super woozy, and I couldn't, since I was like not thinking at the time, I didn't even argue. I was like, okay, I guess I'm not putting on a tourniquet. And I leaned back against the garage door, and I slid down, and I laid there, or I was sitting there, and then everything started getting really fuzzy. My vision started going white. I laid over, and then I got my wife to bring over the kids' wagon so I could put myself in a recovery position. And I was laying there. At this time, she had brought like a rag, and I'd shoved it on my arm, and it slowly stopped. It was like pretty much down to a trickle at that point. Everything was like I couldn't really feel anything, but I could smell and taste in super intensely. So like I could smell the copper, that coppery smell from blood. I could almost taste it. I could taste like the air. It felt like the sun was beating down. Everything started going white, filling my entire vision. And I could hear that a neighbor had come and that my wife was still on the phone with 911. They're only 7 minutes away. It ended up taking them 22 minutes to get to me for some reason. It took them a long time to get to me, which was really weird. And so then I laid down. I was laying down there and everything started fading away. All the voices started fading away. And then all of a sudden, I'm looking down at this body, this dude, and I'm about 15 feet above the ground. I'm looking, I see this woman and this neighbor, and they're kind of like walking back and forth. And there's this dude on the ground, and he looks like shit. Like he looks terrible. And I remember thinking, I was like, man, that poor guy, he don't look so good. And then it hit me. I was like, oh shit, that's me. And as soon as I realized it was me, I started rocketing up. So I went straight up past the clouds, past stars and everything. I end up in this black space. And then I see this small little white light and it starts getting closer and closer. And it has this torn edges kind of thing. And I kind of describe it as if you took white ink and dropped it on a from a height above and dropped it on a black piece of paper, it kind of looked like that. My logo on my for my podcast looks fairly close to that. I was trying to get that same kind of look, which now kind of after the clips and stuff, I was like, it's there's some weird correlations between that and like an eclipse and this light starts getting bigger and bigger, and there's I can feel that there's other things around me. I don't see anything else, but I can feel other things around me, and it's getting closer and closer. Kind of reminds me of from Pixar's Soul, that scene where they're going up the escalator into the this portal kind of thing. It's kind of reminds me of that, except I don't see anybody else. I just feel other things. And as soon as it gets really close, I'm in this meadow, and it's like a stereotypical meadow. And I remember thinking to myself, because it's weird because I was like, my consciousness was fully there, like as me. And I was thinking, wow, this is super stereotypical. And I was like, of course it's a meadow. Oh, and there's a babbling brook. Oh, and a single tree. Yeah. And there's pretty butterflies. Like there's like, and I was never super like sentimental or anything. But at that moment, I was like, wow, this is like super pretty. Like this is like, and it smelled beautiful. The vision was weird though. It was almost like being in a bubble. So it's almost like being in a dream in a bubble. It's really hard to describe. It's like super hard to describe. And grass was tall and beautiful and green and yellow and lots of flowers that are pink and blue. And then I started hearing music, and it was this harp music. And I was like, oh, really? Of course it's harp music. I wish I was a musician because it was some of the most beautiful music I've ever heard. I can almost hear it now, but I don't think I'd ever, even if I'd learned how to play, I don't think I'd ever be able to replicate it. And so this music was playing, and all of a sudden I felt this presence, or presences. I'm not 100% sure. And they were telling me I had a choice that I could stay here, which was super nice, or I could go back. And I was like, well, there's no fucking way I'm going back.
Mm.
No way. I was like, that was shit. There ain't no way I'm going back. I'm a burden on everybody, like even for my kids. Like there's no way I'm a positive force at all. So I was thinking, no, well, that's the easiest choice of my life, actually.
Mm.
And they said, well, before you do that, we're going to show you something. And so all of a sudden I was in this library. And again, I don't see anybody else. I feel other presences, but I don't see anything. Feels like, and this library is huge. It's kind of like if you took like the Vatican, St. Peter's Basilica, and like multiplied it, it would be like is that grand of scale. And it was all wood with levels of books, and the books were really big. They're probably a foot and a half tall, really thick with leather binding. And you could smell the leather, and you could smell these torches, but there was no smoke, and it was like perfectly clear. It would be like an ideal library. And It was huge. It stretched forever. There was like paintings along the ceiling. There was stained glass on windows. It was super beautiful. And I started getting moved along, and then off to the right was a room, and I was led into this room. Again, I can't see anybody, but I feel them. And I'm led into this room. It's another big room, and in the center of this room, and there's books all around again. In the center of the room is a single-legged table, and on it there's a dome. And on this dome, it's a glass dome. They lead me out to it, and this is more like a sense, not so much as I can see it. Like I saw it. It's really hard to describe, but like I saw it, but it's more of a feeling that I witnessed this. And what I saw and what I have a memory of feeling it is that I was shown my like life path, both my present, my past, and my future. I don't remember any of. They didn't let me keep any of the future stuff, of course. But what I was shown was like a tree, and this tree had roots, and that was all these different choices that I could have made, or I did make in another universe or a different reality, and that led to a trunk, the tree trunk. And that tree trunk was my NDE. This was like this one singular point, and then it led from that point to the branches, and those branches were all my future choices that I could make. And then that would turn into tree roots, and then back into a tree trunk. So there's all these points through my life, and I can't speak for anybody else's, but there's all these points that I have to hit. And there's tons of different ways to get there, but there's some points I can't avoid, and there's some events I can't avoid. And one of these things was my NDE.
Mm.
And so it's either it was predestined, it was pre-planned, still doesn't negate free will because there's lots of ways to get to these different points. The closest thing I've seen recently was Spider-Man in the multiverse or across the multiverse. They talk about it as Spider-Man's canon events. And so there's certain points like Uncle Ben dies or Gwen Stacy loses Spider-Man, all these super emotionally impactful moments that changes the course of that person's life. I would say it's about the same as pretty close to that. It's the closest thing I've seen. And then the next thing I know is that they say I can choose whichever one I want. There is no wrong choice, but I have to decide if I'm going to come back or if I'm going to stay there. And then I don't remember actually choosing. I didn't realize that until actually a couple months ago that I don't remember actually choosing. Next thing I know, I wake up and the paramedics asking me my name and seeing if I'm conscious and that she's going to put an IV in me and they're going to put a tourniquet on and that they're asking me if there's anybody else in the house, like because the amount of blood, they're suspecting that there might be more than one person. My wife at the time said, no, it's just him. End up getting taken into the ambulance. My blood pressure at that time was 35 over 45. And I had taken a trauma course a couple months later, and it ended up being that it was less than a 5% chance of survival. So I got taken to the hospital. The triage nurse was asking, and the doctors were asking how much blood I lost, and the paramedics like a lot. She's like, I don't know how to estimate. She's like, I haven't seen that much. And so they're about to switch my tourniquet that they had put on to me to the hospital tourniquet. And I have a dark sense of humor. And I remember I looked down and she had these nice shoes on. And I know nurses, like they have their nice shoes and then they have their working shoes. Mm-hmm. And I said, you should probably change your shoes because I'm a squirter. She's like, really? I was like, yeah. She's like, okay. So she changes her shoes, puts on a gown because she didn't have a gown on. And she took off my tourniquet and I just started squirting everywhere. It was pretty bad. And so she thanked me for that. I told my wife to take my shoes with her because they're going to take me up for surgery. And she's like, why? I was like, they're going to lose my shoes. Take my shoes. And I hadn't taken morphine at this point. I didn't want to take morphine. It was super painful. It's probably one of the most painful things. Not the cut, not the snap muscles. It was the tourniquet. That thing hurt like a son of a bitch. It was the worst. So the surgeon comes down and he says, yeah, we're not sure if we're going to do surgery. We think we can stop the bleeding by direct pressure. So he sticks his fingers 2 knuckles deep into my arm and holds direct pressure on my arm for 30 minutes. and we were chatting. And by this time, I had had morphine. He says to me, or he says, "Okay, I'm going to try it." So he pulls out his fingers, and I said, "Nope, that didn't work." And he's like, "No, I think it did." And then I could feel it from inside out going, "It's not working." And then it started going everywhere. So I end up going for surgery. End up being 6 months of recovery to get to like maybe 25%. My forearm looked like my entire forearm looked like my wrist for months because I couldn't move it. I ended up being off work for a couple months. And then right after, while I was still off work, I ended up seeing my what I thought was my first UFO. And I guess we can pause there if you want.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Because that was a lot. Don't want to
Yeah.
jump right into the UFOs after all of that. That was, yeah. I have questions. You gave so much information and so much of the story, and part of it is how rough your life sounded at that time. A lot
Mm-hmm.
of things really piling up, going
Yeah.
wrong, and then getting to this moment where you're going to choose if you come back or not, and saying no, forget it. Because not only is it great here and it's kind of hard down there, but I'm a burden on everyone.
Mm-hmm.
And yeah, that's really heavy.
Yeah, it was. I didn't realize how bad of a mental state I was at the time. It took me quite a few, probably a year after to realize that, like, and because my slide didn't stop even after my NDE. Like, like when you're tripping down, tripping down a mountain, it's really hard to stop until you get to the bottom. Yeah, my NDE wasn't the bottom. It was like I kept sliding and going, and it was getting rougher and rougher. Uh, yeah, I just seemed to make tons of mistakes throughout my life. It was like one mistake after the other. I would always rely on my like sense of humor to get me through things, but at some points that catches up to you. At that point, I was starting to become like an asshole because I hated my job, and then we started the business, and that just became a whole shit show. Not a very good business person. It just I didn't know enough. I didn't know what I didn't know, and just made a huge amount of mistakes. I ended up hurting people, which I super regret. And I forgot in my NDE right before I had chose, they had with that there is no wrong choices. They did tell me that this is your last chance, though. And I remember that when I woke up, and I forgot. I always forget to tell that part for some reason, but and it would echo throughout my all the way up until now. Um, like that's your last it's my last chance to, but they didn't go into many details.
Last
Of
chance
course.
at what? Yeah,
Yeah,
right. That's, I
exactly.
know.
Yeah. Like at being a good person, like what are we talking here? Yeah.
What have you made of that? Like the last chance in this lifetime, in this, how have you made sense of that, or have you?
uh how I feel about it right now is this exactly what I needed to hear in order to make the changes that were necessary in my life
Mm.
to get back to the core person who I am, not the person that I had become. And if I hadn't had that, I probably would have slipped into old patterns.
Yeah,
So there
yeah.
was this driving force that seemed harsh. And I remember, like, it's hard to think about that stuff now because it feels almost removed now.
Hmm.
That it felt like super harsh, like wow, like you don't have any other chances. Like I've gone through all of my chances, and I remember there was a joke with my kids that I was like a cat with 9 lives, and this was
Mm.
my last one because I had almost died so many times before this. I'd had a
Hmm.
heart attack before this from a peanut allergy, where the paramedics had given me too much epinephrine. Turns out I have this rare thing where I can't take epi or adrenaline because my body compensates. It's called hyperanaphylaxis. And so I can't take an EpiPen. It just makes it worse. And I end up having a heart attack, and this was a couple of years before the NDE, but I didn't see much, but it was red and it was hot. So
Wow.
that apparently I'm a slow learner and I need a bit of a harder kick to get out of my patterns. So yeah, I end up changing you can't really recognize my life now compared to what it was.
Yeah.
Um, I don't even think I'm like this. I'm definitely not the same person. I'm probably more like I was like when I was a kid.
Hmm.
Um, yeah, it's totally different. Very
Yeah.
different. Hmm.
Amazing. So before this happened, were you interested in like near death experiences, paranormal stuff?
I've only watched a couple of NDE videos
Mm.
to this day. And it's only been like the last 6 months that I've watched a couple.
Hmm.
For some reason, I was never drawn to it. UFOs. There was a long time I was super interested in it just because of my family history. I just never knew I was an experiencer. I always just thought it was my mom and my grandpa. So my grandpa had experiences from 1939 up until his death. And then my mom had a close encounter in 1967 or 69, I can't remember, where a ship landed at their farm in rural Manitoba. And it was my mom, her two sisters, and her brother when they were younger. So my mom was like 10 at the time. And it landed in Manitoba. They were playing in the fog and they saw this giant ship and it looked like a cowboy hat. And they thought it was a granary tower at first, but the granary tower wasn't there. It was on like the other side of the farm. And they're like, oh, that's really weird. And then this light appeared at the bottom of the door, and this little turtle shell ship came out and it went into the ditch and then came up. And it was about the size of like a Volkswagen bug. And then another doorway appeared in this little ship, and then three little beings, three or four little beings, depends on which one of the siblings you ask. They came out and they started dancing, and my mom still thinks to this day, like it felt like they were like dancing and wanted to play. And they
Mm.
didn't call them aliens or NHI or anything like that. They called them fairies because it was like the closest narrative that they could think of. And then my mom's littlest sister took a step forward, and then they all blacked out. And the next thing my mom and all her siblings remember is that they're all running back to the farm towards my grandpa's out on the deck, and same with my great grandma, and then grandpa with with all the kids strapped to him walk out where the ship was, and all they saw was a burnt like a crop circle.
Mm.
Like my mom remembers three, my grandpa's journal said one, so it depends on who you ask. So it was a long time ago. Yeah, so that's that was the story that I grew up with for the longest time. And so every summer we'd go back to Manitoba. I'd always be quizzing each one of them separately just to see if after like 20 years, I wonder if the story changes too much because like you never know. So there was a period in my life, like when I was younger, I was super interested, and then I hit like 20 and I just kind of dropped off. I was curious. Sometimes I'd check in and out, and I was always loved sci-fi. It's like my favorite genre. But yeah, I had a curiosity that was pretty much gone by the time my NDE hit.
Hmm.
And then after my NDE, well, you're questioning everything, but it didn't take very long after to see my first UFO with my daughter and my other daughter and my wife.
Yeah. Wow. Okay. So you have this family lore that you grew up with that's interesting and intriguing to you, but sounds like a family story. Like they were
Yeah.
pretty open about it and talked about it.
Yeah, they talked
And
about it all the time. Yeah, we always
yeah,
talked about UFOs when we went to Manitoba. It was a family secret that we just kept inside the family because
mhm,
they learned, my mom and her siblings learned really early not to talk about it just
yeah,
because of the stigma and kids and how mean they can be and stuff. So yeah, we kept it quiet.
yeah. And then you're living your life, going through this really difficult time, and out of the blue have this
Mhm.
really intense experience. So this is interesting because a lot of people, when they talk about, kind of wanting to have mystical
Yeah.
experiences or wild experiences or
No.
near-death experiences, I think the perception is that we have these experiences and then there's this instant like, oh, I've seen the other side. Everything is amazing. Everything's great. And what I've seen much more often than that is this deep integration that happens, and it becomes this experience that prompts us into new worlds. And as you said, it wasn't like this experience was okay, I almost died, I hit rock bottom, I had this transcendent experience, I woke up the next day and went, I'm going to change my life. And
No.
yeah. So tell me about what it was like to have that experience and then live your everyday life with all these tough things happening.
Oh, you always have to do the hard ones, eh?
No pressure, man. No
Yeah,
pressure.
yeah. Yeah, it was it's the integrate it's like everyone talks about that ontological shock. Well, at the time I didn't know what the fuck a ontological shock was. And that's the other big part is there's no guide. Um or if there is, I never saw it, and it's like walking around in the dark with your hands are behind your back and you're bumping your nose against the walls everywhere. it was a horrible time, to be honest. I wouldn't wish that experience on anyone. Do I love it now? Yeah, looking back, I'm super grateful for the experience, but it fucking sucked going through it.
Yeah.
The before the NDE and afterwards. So I was searching for something, and I was trying to figure a way out that I knew something with my life was wrong.
Mm,
Like I loved my kids. My marriage was crumbling at the time. We were stressed to the max. We got together super early. We had no good communication skills. Just everything was difficult. There was nothing easy, it seemed. I had started after that as a coping mechanism, started smoking shit tons of weed
mhm,
just to try to get through the day because it was just like and I was still working at the same time. So I was off work for three months, and then I went right back to a job because I had gone after my business failed. I'd gone back to the job I hated
mm,
because it's the only thing I could do. So I went back to that job. It felt like a prison. I couldn't see a way out. Financially, we were drowning, and I know from like everyone knows about financial scarcity and how that can be just as traumatizing. And they don't talk about like there's a couple different triggering moments that you can have in a life, like
mm,
loss of a spouse or loss of a family member, having a near death experience, losing your house, losing a business. Like I had a whole bunch of them all at once. Again, I probably could have taken an easier route. And then trying to cope, I just kept sliding further and further down until I ended up being near suicidal.
mm,
I didn't think I was suicidal at the time. Looking back, I can't classify that knife incident as an accident anymore. I don't think I stopped it. Is my personal opinion right now of what happened. And end up going to emergency psychologist at the hospital because
mm,
I was pretty much done. I was in there for like an hour, and he said I had borderline personality disorder, yeah, severe ADHD, and that maybe in 20 years I could heal.
mm.
It's gonna be a long time. The diagnosis is kind of like a life sentence, which is really hard to hear,
Yeah.
especially when you're grasping at straws to like stay there. And then I kept having that echo of like, this is your last chance. And I'm like, well, it's not fucking easy.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and so, sorry,
That's okay. Thanks for saying it.
it's not that easy.
It's not easy. One of the most powerful moments we have in our story is the turn. And in
Yeah.
order to get to the turn, we like got to get to the bottom if you have capacity
Yeah.
for it, you know? Yeah.
Yeah. And it feels like you'll never get out. And
Yeah.
that's the scary part. And it's something that we don't talk about enough.
Mhm.
It's just because even though I'm through it, that hurricane and getting hit with a fire hose and getting buried all at once, uh, well, it doesn't seem like anyone can survive it.
Mm, mhm. Yeah.
Um, yeah, so I felt like I had a death sentence essentially.
Mhm.
And then the next week he scheduled me for the next week, and I went back, just barely holding on, didn't really know what to do. And he started talking about different therapies we could do. That I have abandonment issues, that I'm a highly emotional person, that I've shut off all of my emotion. I was essentially like before my NDE. I didn't realize that at the time, but I had shut down all of my emotions. So if you're into Myers Briggs and stuff, I was an ENTP,
Mm,
and then after my NDE, I'm now an ENFP, which is kind of
mm,
interesting. So it's a totally different way of looking at the world. So my armor was wrapped. I had wrapped myself in armor of closing off everything,
mhm,
including myself. So I couldn't feel myself because I was trying not to feel, desperately trying not to feel myself and desperately not trying to feel anybody else.
mhm,
And so I was dealing with these abandonment issues, and then right in the middle of the session, and I'm like crying in the middle of it.
mhm.
His dad dies.
Oh my gosh. Wow.
Yeah, and
Oh.
so forced because I'm a fixer
Mm,
because I'm trying to fix myself, but I project that onto other people.
mm,
I'm trying to comfort him while I'm in my own crisis, and he ends up having to. He's like, okay. He's like, well, we'll pick this up. Are you okay? And well, what you're supposed to say is dad just died. So I said, yeah, of course I'm fine. Suck it up, right? And so he leaves, and I'm left with this total abandonment
Mm.
by this person. Which, to be fair, like his dad just died.
Yeah.
Like
Yeah.
it's hard to blame him, but that totally took my trust out of my one time with a psychologist in my worst time of my life, and that happened. And so I
Hmm.
left, and I didn't know what to do, and I was just dead. I
Mm.
just was wandering around. Um, we were still settling up lawsuits. We were still trying to figure out how the fuck we're gonna, how I was gonna, like, how we'd feed the kids, like,
Mm.
worrying about the kids, like, because not just dealing with the pandemic now, but we're dealing with financial ruin, like all this stuff. It was super tough on the kids. Uh, not so much my youngest because she was pretty little, but my oldest, like she bears the scars of that. Sorry.
No, I really don't want to push you into this. I feel, I didn't know this part of your story, Sean, or I wouldn't have asked you to tell it.
No, 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 it's okay. I've been wanting to tell it for a while, so I
Okay.
think it's probably the important part.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, take your time and we can take a break and, whatever you need.
No, I'm okay. I'm
Okay.
okay.
All right.
It's just tough when I talk about my daughters. So,
Of course. Yeah. Yeah.
um, yeah, so I didn't know what to do, and I happened to be watching Joe Rogan of all things, and he had Paul Stamets on,
Mm.
and Paul Stamets was talking about mushrooms, and Joe Rogan was talking about magic mushrooms and DMT, and how all these different therapies that and things that these psychedelics have fixed. And so I looked into the therapy that the psychologist or psychiatrist, I can't remember which one it was. I think it was a psychiatrist. He had prescribed, and I went to go sign up for them. They were all full for a year. So of course, right, the universe is like, well, it's not your path. Looking back, that's what I
Yeah.
think. So I was like, well, I literally have no choice. I can't go on like this. I need to try something. And so watching those podcasts really gave me the impetus to try anything. And
Hmm.
so I did what I normally do. I got my ADHD brain on hyperdrive and researched the shit out of mushrooms. So I
Hmm.
learned everything I could about it. I read everything I could on it. And at the same time, I was starting to look into shamanism. And
Mm.
so these two things were going parallel with each other. And so I started devouring podcasts on shamanism and how shamans use it's like the wounded healer,
Mm.
and how they use plant medicine in order to heal. And I'm learning everything I can about narcissism and borderline personality disorder to understand myself, because my wife at the time has said I was a narcissist, and my psychiatrist said I wasn't, but I was like, I don't know. I had some tendencies, but that was mostly through the borderline personality disorder. And for anybody that doesn't know, there's several types of borderline personality disorder. There's impulsive, there's aggressive, like there's quite a few. It's not just one, and you have to have a certain number of the different traits in order to classify as a borderline personality disorder. Mine was impulsive.
Mm.
So the classic thing is I would leap without looking
Mm.
and hope to hell there was water underneath.
Yeah.
Um, so I started doing, I looked up everything, and somehow I was able to get magic mushrooms, and I started doing macro doses once every 2 weeks. That's to start. And I would do heavy doses. So I'd start at 5, and then I'd go up to 7 grams at a time of mushrooms. And it was the worst. Probably those trips were probably one of the worst experiences of my life, because it just shows you everything that it like strips away everything that you've been trying to hide, and then it
Mm.
starts showing it to you. And I think it was my first trip. I had a experience where I talked to death. He
Mm.
was a cool dude. Um, but he said you shouldn't be so quick to chase it. Quit trying to chase this. You should start worrying more about living than dying. And I slowly started coming out of it, but it was so much work. It was like I did it for 6 months straight of heavy macro dosing in order to just get to a point where I could survive. Yeah, it was super tough.
And you did it on your own.
Yeah, it was super difficult, but I was able to get through it
Hmm.
slowly, and it was that gave me the chance to breathe. So that was like the first time I was able to breathe,
Mm.
but it took a long time.
Yeah. It gave you a chance to breathe, just relieved some of the pressure, some of the pain that you were in. Is that right?
Yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
and the guilt and like
Hmm.
the self-hate.
Hmm.
It was easy to hate yourself.
Yeah. Yeah.
Like that's such an easier thing. Like I don't think we talk about that enough. Is that how much self-loathing is so much easier than self-love?
Mm-hmm.
That's
Yeah.
super difficult.
I have a saying that you can't hate yourself enough to become someone that you'll love.
Yeah,
And the reason that I have that saying is because of my own journey with it. Like,
yeah,
yeah, it's a weird thing. It's a very weird thing why we feel that way and how that can spiral and how the answer is just this really deep unconditional love for ourselves and how what a hard journey that is. Yeah.
yeah. Not just the love, but the trust. Yeah, because
Absolutely.
I didn't
Yeah.
trust anybody. I've been betrayed by my business partner at the time, and I've been betrayed by the psychologist. Like it just
Mm.
was like never ending cycle of you can't trust anyone. And I
Yeah.
was always a trusting person to a fault.
Hmm.
And then all of a sudden I'm like, I can't trust anyone. And then you're supposed to trust yourself, and you don't trust your own feelings because you've been told you're broken.
Yeah.
And that yeah, it was super difficult. Yeah, there's one quote that I saw. Up until this point, you have 100% success rate of getting through this.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Hmm.
really liked that. Yeah, and I kept exploring shamanism and really diving into the history with that. So I started doing guided meditations and trying to figure out what the fuck is going on.
Hmm.
And that is the thing. Like you're not just trying to deal with healing yourself. You're trying to figure out what the fuck is reality. Everything after the NDE felt like it was almost fake. It was almost like superpowers. I could start feeling people, but I didn't realize I was feeling people. I thought it was only myself. So I was becoming super chaotic.
Mm.
So I wouldn't realize it took me a long time, 6 months to a year to figure out that I was feeling other people and they were affecting my own emotions. So it was, I remember the specific moment that I realized it wasn't just me and I could connect to other people. And I was in a crane doing my job, and all of a sudden this wave of anger just came over me, and I was just pissed. I wanted to fucking punch things, kick things, and there was zero reason for it. And I couldn't figure it out. And I
Hmm.
looked to my right and I happened to see my buddy there, and he had an anger issue, and he was punching and kicking things because I
Mm.
think he dropped something, and
Yeah.
he was super angry. He was super quick to anger. And then I realized, holy shit, I might not be crazy. Right? Like after the NDE, I was thinking like I was going fucking nuts.
Yeah.
Then I got told I was nuts, that I had like something wrong with me. But I didn't even tell him about the weird stuff.
Right.
He was thinking I was already like I should go into the asylum, and I didn't even tell him about the weird shit.
Yeah. Yeah.
I
Right.
remember asking my dad, I was like, I don't know, I think I'm going crazy. And he says, well, if you think you're going crazy, you're probably not, because
Right.
crazy people don't ask. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So during all of this time, was the NDE in the back of your mind? Would it come, would you think about it? Would it come and go?
It hasn't left.
It's the whole time it was with
Yeah,
you. Yeah.
it's pretty much stuck with me this entire time, especially the this is your last chance. That was echoing all the time. So I'd base all my decisions on like, this is your last chance. Like, if I was going to make a decision, am I going to regret this?
Mm-hmm.
And so
Hmm.
I started making decisions that I would normally never do, because I skip a couple of years ahead, I end up getting divorced. That was never in my head.
Hmm.
Um, like all these things, all these choices that I made, I don't think I would have been brave enough or had the courage and to do it without that it felt like a guillotine or an axe
Mm.
hanging over you.
Yeah.
And I think this was specifically for my personality. Like, I think that's what people really have to understand about NDE messages and all this stuff. And same with experiences, like experiences with non-human intelligences or ghosts, or I think it's super tailored to you
Mm-hmm.
because it's not a one trick pony. That's why it's super hard to categorize, because it's not, because we're all individual. We all have our different struggles. We all have different stimuli that change how we view the world. We have different perspectives. And for me, that authoritative shaking its finger at you, the universe going, like, you better fucking smarten up. Like, this is your last chance. That's
Mm-hmm.
exactly what I need to hear at that time in order to do the really difficult choices in order to change my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, on that note, that's why when I talk about this stuff, I say often, like, none of what I went through and the choices that I made are prescriptive. Don't do what I did, right? Like, I'm not telling people that this is the path to follow. Like, several of my experiences included surrendering and like turning
Mm.
towards the really hard thing and being in this terrifying paralysis
Yeah.
that I was fighting, 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 and then deciding like, maybe I shouldn't, like, what would happen if I stopped fighting? I don't know if that's a good idea. Maybe you should fight. Like, I don't
Yeah.
know. But
Yeah. And
for
it
me,
depends on the person. Yeah.
yeah.
I remember thinking at the point of like just feeling like you got annihilated
Yeah.
and just
Yeah.
blown apart into millions of pieces. That's what
Right.
it felt like.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
And so, even what you're talking about with the psychedelics, that's a really heavy move. That's a big move to do and could go a different way for somebody else, right?
Yeah, well, you usually hear about all the horror stories, and
Yeah.
it was dicey because I was having some of the most intense moments of my life on these psychedelics. But I was also tracking and feeling. I was using a guide on how I was feeling at the time to see. I was doing it like almost in like a scientific method, where I would track my mood the day before, the day after, and all the days up until I had another mushroom trip, and I was tracking it to make sure so I could see on a scale of where I was in order to know how often I have to do it in order to keep me balanced. So like the first day after, I was like I was doing really good, and then the second day started going down, third day down, fourth day down, seventh day like I'm back down to where I was, but is it going lower? And so then I would try to stretch it out, and then I'd be like, okay, this is too much. So I'll go back into it and I'll change the dosage. I'll change which type I'm doing, and trying to experiment to see which one was doing the best for me. And then also learning about shadow work
Mm-hmm.
and how to not be afraid of yourself, which is really hard. The hardest part is being honest, and I don't even know if I am right now. Like, you don't know. You don't
Yeah,
know what you don't know.
that's right.
But trying to understand yourself and trying to figure out the shitty parts about yourself that you don't want to admit.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
Because there's lots of parts that you don't want to admit about yourself that in order to heal, you have to acknowledge it, and you have to feel it, because you have to feel it to heal it. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's
Yeah.
tough.
Not a journey for the faint of heart, for sure.
No,
Yeah.
no, I don't
And
recommend it.
right. Yeah,
Definitely not.
exactly. Right. Yeah.
Fuck no. Go do something easier. It's not that fun.
Yeah.
It sounds, yeah, I hear all the time. It's like, wow, that I'd love to have that. Oh, I don't think it comes with a lot of fucking baggage.
Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a hero's journey for sure, right? And
Hmm.
these heroes, the thing I say about the hero's journey or the descent of Anana is that there's really no guarantee that we get through it. There really
No.
isn't. It seems to be that there are stakes,
Hmm.
and there are certainly stakes for us here on this planet in these bodies, and this stuff is the realest of the real.
Yeah.
And yeah, and just like I had moments in my journey in my life that could have gone another way very quickly, and then maybe I wouldn't survive.
Hmm.
And sounds like you have had plenty of those as well.
Yeah. The hero's journey resonates with me like an insane amount. That was early on in my journey. I was finding about finding out about the hero's journey. I just recently listened to what's the book, Joseph Campbell's A Hero's Journey.
Heroes
I
with a
just
Thousand
recently
Faces.
listened.
Yeah.
Yeah, A Thousand Faces of and I just recently listened to it. But yeah, the hero's journey is probably one of the ones that I started really looking into. There's this great podcast called Know Thyself.
Mm,
And what they did was they compared the hero's journey with astrology and tarot.
mm,
And then it was coming out. You know how in the universe sometimes you're like, it's like the perfect timing for you? Well, it was coming out exactly in the right step as I was experiencing it.
mm,
So they would do like the Fool and Aries and the beginning of Hercules's journey. And then the next month. So I'd be using that as a backdrop for that whole month of exploring while I was doing mushrooms, while I was exploring shamanism, while I started looking into Hermeticism about all these different pieces I could see the patterns in my life.
this is a very human story. This is a very
Hmm.
human thing that we do is we go on these journeys, and it's ubiquitous. And finding a path when everything is dark and we're in
Yeah.
the forest and we're lost and there doesn't seem to be a path, and then suddenly there's a path
Yeah.
is enormous. It's life-saving.
Yeah. And sometimes can't even recognize the path
Right. Right.
and you're just kind of wandering around. You don't realize you're on the path.
Yeah.
But until you're like turned around and you're like, oh shit, there's a path this entire time. I just didn't see it.
Right. Right. It's
And then
behind me actually. Like I'm
yeah,
I'm making the path as I'm
yeah,
walking through.
you have the machete as you're chopping through the bush.
Right.
Yeah, and the sometimes I don't think I actually made it out.
Mm,
I think that something else made it out, and that was whoever I am right now.
mm,
Now, if that was the original me, I don't know. Who knows?
right.
Yeah, and so yeah, the hero's journey has probably been it's something I always go back to, much more than Plato's cave.
Hmm. Hmm.
I think the hero's journey has resonated with me extremely deeply. It's the same with the progression of the major arcana of the tarot.
Hmm.
That
Hmm.
also really resonated with me.
Yeah. It's a similar story, isn't it? Like we keep
Hmm.
telling the same stories of and the descent of Inanna is
Hmm.
similar as well. It's about facing the thing, being forged kind of by fire into something that's useful for the world in some
Hmm.
ways. This idea of that is really resonant for me, which I've experienced many, many times, is the idea that we die and don't die. And that's what happened to you is you died and didn't die. And there's a difference
Yeah.
on the other side. Like things are different on the other side of that journey.
Yeah, that your episode about that, like dying before you're dying, it super resonates because you lose that fear, but God, it takes forever.
Yeah,
It's not
yeah.
like it's like you died and you're like, oh, I'm not afraid of anything. No, fuck. I just got here.
Yeah, yeah, right. It's a
And I'm
journey.
still afraid of stuff. Like God, still
Yeah.
afraid of bears. Yeah, it's super hard, but it gets easier. Even though it doesn't seem like it's like leveling up on a game, even though everything's gone harder.
Hmm.
It's still easier at the same time. Our world is a paradox because I don't even know examples, but I know we live in a paradoxical world. It just doesn't make
Yeah.
sense, and it shouldn't make sense, but it does, and
Hmm.
that's the
Right.
paradox.
That's the
Yeah,
paradox. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. And things get harder. It doesn't seem that the cycles and the journeys and the lessons and the learning and it's not like it goes away, but we get our
Mm.
footing and
Yeah.
start to trust that this path, start to trust that even if this is my experience anyway, that even if the next challenge comes along, I actually can survive this. I know how to do this. I know how to
Mhm.
let go. I know how to go towards the hard thing. I know how to, you know, buck up and do the thing that's being called to be done, even though I really, really don't want to do it. But if it's like a soul call, like, all right, all right.
Yeah, I literally just had that the last 2 weeks,
Yeah.
and seems to be a pattern.
Mm.
Before I got this new job, so I'm an instructor now. Whole other ball game. Trying to learn how to be a teacher is
Yeah.
super difficult. But it seems to be now I can kind of see the path of like there's something to do with teaching. I never thought I would ever teach. I never thought I had anything of value to talk about,
Mm-hmm.
or anything like that. But I can kind of see like a thread of where maybe I'll be going. But I'm learning all these tools. The hero's journey doesn't just apply to individuals, it applies to collectives. And this
Absolutely.
applies and this applies to like corporations, to countries, and you can see this if you zoom out for like countries or the world. You
Mm-hmm.
can see that we're going through the same dark night of the soul as a collective. We're going through these heroes journeys, and like right now we're like right at the bottom.
Yeah. Yeah.
But this has the huge opportunity to create change in a stagnant environment.
Mm.
Like you need a big rock sometimes to make those ripples. And you have to have a lot of trust.
Yeah. Right. Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. Amazing. So you have gone through a lifetime's worth of transformation in a few years.
Yeah. Yeah. It's been a fast and furious road.
Yeah. Yeah.
There's been a lot of car wrecks.
Right. And how is it now? I mean, how do you
I'm the
know,
happiest I've ever been. Yeah. The kids are the happiest they've ever been. I think. My parents think so too. Like I've met the greatest partner for me I could ever imagine.
mm,
She's awesome. We traveled lots now together. We're separated by thousands and thousands of miles. So that's not ideal, but it's been probably best for trying to develop communication skills when
mm,
neither of us, we have to learn how to communicate. And it's not as easy as it sounds. Like I did not have very good communication skills. I was great short term.
hmm.
But
Yeah.
long term, it gets difficult, right? Because you have to be radically honest. And it's about that radical honesty. But that's really tough when you're dealing with a partner.
Absolutely.
Um, yeah. And so we've been learning how to do that together. We're kind of like on the same trajectory of growth.
Hmm.
We're usually offset a bit by a couple months. When we first met, it was like we were both going through the same thing at the same time, and it was just brutal. It's like I'm feeling like shit. I'm feeling like shit. There's no energy to like pop each other up. There's no physicality because we're separated by thousands of miles.
Yeah.
But now we're kind of offset, so
Hmm.
we're able to pick each other up when one of us is down, and able to like throw the dinghy out every once in a while, so you're not drowning completely. So that's good.
Yeah.
Um, I'm holding meditation groups now, which I know, again, if you had asked me a couple of years ago that I would be leading meditations when I'm Mr. ADHD, and I don't think I never would have guessed it. But now I'm like leading them, which is really weird. Like I'm guiding them. So, which I still find really freaking weird. Uh, it's really weird. I'm part of the experience group, which is awesome. I started the podcast, which I never thought I was going to do. Never thought I would be talking about my experiences. But it just feels like it's that pay it forward. I know, like for my own healing journey, listening to others, listening to you, listening to Jay, listening to every experiencer that's talked about their own experiences it was like a life preserver, because it was the one of the things that helped me know that I wasn't alone. We talk about it a lot, but like in the community, I guess. But when you don't know that there's a community out there, God, it feels terrifyingly alone.
Yeah.
And then hearing others say that, oh yeah, I saw that too, or or just hearing that, yeah, life fucking sucks, but you can get through it.
Hmm.
Sometimes that helps.
Absolutely. Right. Right.
Hmm.
Yeah. There's a lot of, I think, internalized kind of, you talked about it before, like shame and guilt and
Hmm.
confusion just about life in general. And,
Hmm.
then not to mention these wild things that happen and just having other people say, yeah, me too. Like, I don't have all the answers. I haven't figured it all out, but here we are together and I believe you. And, you know, I made it through this thing. You're going to make it through this thing. And then we can turn around and offer the same hand to somebody else coming up. Like, I
Yeah,
know how hard this is. And
it's like a
also,
human ladder.
yeah, absolutely. Yeah.
Yeah.
Helping each other out. Thank you so much for listening. And thank you to Morgan Jenks for our musical soundscapes. The Bridge Collective Today is the final day to sign up for the Bridge Collective. So if you're interested in that, this is a vetted community. You do need to reach out to me before you sign up so that we can have a conversation and see if it's a good space for you and where you are in your journey right now. If you'd like to do that, please feel free to reach out. Also, I'm kind of pushing my Meet the Guides sessions right now. They've been really powerful and really fun, and unexpected things are happening. It's a great time. I feel like I'm in a groove. So if you've been curious about one-on-one guided journey work with me, I think now's a great time to reach out. And also, I'm putting out the call again. Anyone who would like to share part of their story through an anonymous or not voice note to be played on the podcast, please reach out. Please share that with me, or reach out to me and tell me why you would be a great guest on the podcast. I have some exciting folks coming up, and you might be one of them. That would be fun. All right. Thank you again so much. If you would like to reach out to me or learn more about my work, please visit honeyheart.org.